And if you look at some of the articles on number of percentage of Americans who are uninsured, long-term physical outlet, there's bleed, it just goes on and on. If there comes a time when I think we need to do what's right, and I can't tell you what to do, but I do believe if collectively we express our opinion to our elected officials, we can take our country back and get a better focus on what we, the people, want, because they are spending our future. And I'm pleased to introduce Greg Skeeter. Greg is the founder and executive director. So you just give it away. The founder and he's the head honcho of National Priorities Project. It's a nonprofit organization that's been around for 24 years. He is often interviewed in national media. The numbers that they compile are very useful in terms of and used widely around the country and can help us make significant changes in legislation. The numbers they provide are trade-offs. What the dollars that we're spending on military defense could be paid for in our communities. And I commend you, and thank you very much for coming from Massachusetts.
I have no idea what I'm saying.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Sam, for organizing this event. The main thing I want to do tonight is get people involved in thinking about our priorities. What are they and what should they be? Now, I want to talk a lot about the role of the federal government and cities, but before I do any talking, I want you to really get involved in this. So before I do anything else, I would like you to take a look at that, and I want you to think of what you think our federal priorities should be. I hope you've got a sheet of paper with you and a pencil. Is what I'm going to ask you to do is just spend a minute or two looking at these 10 categories up here. I hope you can read it. Military spending, interest in the debt, healthcare, anti-poverty, and so on. And I want you to think, if you were a member of Congress, how would you allocate that income tax dollar? How much of that 100 cents, remember we don't go into debt here, how much of that 100 cents would you put into those categories? Just think about that for a couple of minutes and write down at least your top 3 priorities. They're on the categories are there. So of 100 cents, I'm sorry, but can you read that?
The laptop is
Can you see that? Yeah. Okay. So 3 minutes to do it. I'm told that may be more time than some members of Congress have spent on this other trip. Yes, I'm sorry. Military is on this side. Interest on the debt. Healthcare, anti-poverty, education and social services is one category, and that's federal education. That's state or local. Government and law enforcement is another category. Housing, the environment, agriculture and commerce is another one, and international affairs. So for the folks who just came in, and just having people begin to sort of think of what your priorities would be if you were a member of Congress. We've got 10 or 11 categories, and I'd be interested in knowing what you think individually, how you allocate an income tax dollar. So if you could, and I'd like people to jot down the 2 or 3 that are most important to you, and how many cents you would allocate to them. Let's assume international affairs, because that's really what it's supposed to be, is international peace, which we'll get in there with the Secretary of State to development aid, etc. tell you where it actually goes to see if there's any discrepancies between the federal government's income tax dollars. But let me just quickly get a sense of what are some of the people's top three.
Education.
Pardon me?
Education.
Education. How much to education did you give?
Zero.
Zero.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying slow. I kind of like you said, I was through things happening, right?
Okay, that's one opinion. Anybody else got any money into education? Yeah. How much?
That doesn't mean it's not important.
Okay.
30%.
30? Okay.
20% of the top.
That's black grants to let the states figure out. Okay. Other categories that people have.
Healthcare.
How much for healthcare?
Single payer universal health care for all.
Hey, after that, you got
Healthcare for all.
Okay. Other topics?
Poverty.
Okay. How many cents? Out of curiosity.
25.
25 cents? Okay. Well, you get the sense that these people are thinking about priorities, and I think that's really important. I'll come back to where it actually goes in a minute or two, but what I'd like to do tonight is talk a little bit about a couple things. First of all, what's happening in our communities. I think it's important to look beyond Annapolis and see the rest of our cities hurting. I know that there are some budget problems here in Annapolis. I've done work with a number of other communities. I'd like to share some of that information. And also, the second thing I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the history of the federal role with communities and what that has been. And take a look at it if the trend is looking more positive or more negative right now. And then I'd like to get into the specifics of where our tax dollars are going, how much is going for the war, and what the implications of that are. And then finally, I'd like to share some ideas of what I think people can do to be able to address this issue. And I'm going to point this up here. Good. But let me just say a couple words about the National Priorities Project and how we began, because I think it has a lot to do with some of the things that people are concerned about here. I began my professional life about 42 years ago, as a VISTA volunteer. Some of you probably remember VISTA and the War on Poverty in the 1960s. And I did a lot of work in the north end of Springfield, Massachusetts, from the mid-60s to the early 1970s, and really had the chance to see the federal government actually help make a difference. I saw the neighborhood begin to turn itself around. Leadership developed, and leadership addressed housing issues and education issues, and healthcare issues. It started a development corporation and began to develop home ownership and jobs and so on. And things really began to turn around until 1980, and then came the cut in federal social spending. The Reagan budget priorities were a lot different. People began to talk about $30 billion a year increases in military spending and $30 billion decreases in social spending. And so people really weren't sure what that meant at the local level. And I began to see that the very programs that were being cut were the programs that made a difference. So what I ended up doing is bringing together a number of people from throughout Western Massachusetts, and we took a look at the impact of the budget cuts in one congressional district, and found out that district, it took us about 9 months to do this report, had actually lost over $50 million in 2 years of budget cuts. And there were cuts in healthcare and education and job training. And the interesting thing is that our congressperson wouldn't meet with us for a while. He wouldn't meet with us because he didn't believe our numbers. But after a while when he did, and he had to meet with us because we had so many people there, he actually became very supportive. The reason he wouldn't meet with us is he had his staff check out our numbers, and he found out that our numbers were correct. The guy was Silvio Conti. He was a ranking Republican on the Appropriations Committee, and he didn't realize the impact of budget shifts on his congressional district. And so what we realized out of that is if he doesn't know the impacts of federal policies, who does know? And so what we ended up doing is meeting with them on a